hi. I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is gonna be a weird one. So welcome back, or welcome, if this is your first time here. If so, you picked one hell of a week. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection, if 30 or 40, as the last couple episodes have been. Minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds, here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Around the time of the release of the Whiskey A Go-Go 1968 live album, I got a very special record, made by regulars at the Whiskey. And here I am sharing it with you. It's a rare one, it's a weird one. You guys really seem to like the last time I showcased a rare album on this show, so we're doing it again. To my knowledge, this here, right now, is the only deep dive on this album on the whole of YouTube. No pressure! This week's album is Permanent Damage by the GTOs. Congrats if you somehow guessed this one. If you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls where sometimes you get to pick what's on the show. I make announcements when I'm places that aren't here, like my podcast. You can find all of that on my channel. All right, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is an original, and yeah, this is the most expensive album I've ever bought. Disclaimer, I am not out here buying $95 albums every day. This was a special purchase. I bought this for myself for my 25th birthday. 25 is a pretty big birthday, so I wanted to treat myself, as they say. So let's talk about this cover art, this absolutely striking jacket of pinks and purples against this bright acid green, one of my favorite colors. Miss Pamela, the chick in the middle with the fiddle, remembers a Miss Andy taking the cover photo. Each of the girls is dressed in their GTO best. Miss P holds a fiddle to impress the object of her affection at the time, Chris Hillman of the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers. On the back, we have this striking shot of Miss Christine. You may recognize her from the Hot Rats album art. And a little story she wrote to kind of introduce the record. We have a very personal touch from the ladies on the gatefold, a headshot of each of the girls with liner notes they wrote themselves. Each GTO explains what being a GTO means to them. Underneath the track listing, each girl dedicates the album to her loved ones, whether that be Jimmy Page or Jesus. Permanent Damage is written and performed by the GTOs. What does that stand for? Girls together, overtly, openly, occasionally, but mostly girls together, outrageously. The recording lineup of the GTOs consists of Christine Furka, aka Miss Christine, Cynthia Wells, aka Miss Cinderella, Sandra Lynn Rowe, Miss Sandra, born Judith Peters, but changed her name to Miss Mercy, Linda Sue Parker, or Miss Sparky, and Pamela Ann Miller, Miss Pamela. There was a seventh member of the group, Miss Lucy, who gave them the title of Mrs. Tiny Tim, of course. Serving as the girls' backing band are the Mothers of Invention, at the time consisting of Roy Estrada, Ian Underwood, Dawn Preston, and Jimmy Carl Black. Our special guests include Rod Stewart, who provides vocals for Shock Treatment, Nicky Hopkins on piano, Lowell George of Little Feat, Ry Cooder, and Jeff Beck on guitar, with arrangements by Davy Jones of the Monkees. You cannot make this shit up. Permanent Damage was produced by Frank Zappa, with Russ Titelman and Lowell George. Roll transition. So before we get into how in the hell this thing happened, I have to make a quick note. My numbers 1 and 2 resources this week were the From Straight to Bizarre documentary and Miss Pamela's book, I'm with the Band. Without these key resources preserving the making of quite an obscure album, this week's episode simply would not have been possible. It was no secret that Frank Zappa pushed buttons and ruffled feathers. Our story today begins in 1968-ish. Maybe we're getting into the back half of 67, with Frank's falling out with Verve Records and their parent company MGM. Things really kick off when Paul McCartney dared cite Freak Out as an influence on Sgt. Pepper's. In response, Frank and the Mothers made We're Only in It for the Money. These Mothers is crazy. Sure, Verve execs pulled the plug on the 3-part ballet that Monster Magnet was supposed to be. But now, they went so far as to edit We're Only in It for the Money. Frank was pissed. He was entirely uncompromising with his artistic vision. It was his and no one else's. No one was gonna censor that or water it down. Frank links up with manager Herbie Cohen and starts scheming. By technicality, if you count that botched Sandy Hurwitz album, Bizarre Records was functioning before Frank's contract with Verve was up. Later on came sister label Straight, which Permanent Damage would be released on. Frank wanted acts that pushed the boundaries of what was considered music. Freaks, if you will. His first was Captain Beefheart. My god, I cannot wait to do a Trout Mask replica episode. It is now an inevitability. That would break my brain and you people would eat it up. With these freaks came the family and friends of freaks. Captain Beefheart had a cousin, Victor Hayden the Mascara Snake, and he was friends with Pamela Ann Miller, a smiley, open-faced, aspiring actress. Her only role at the time was in a Jimi Hendrix video, which is super rare nowadays. Meanwhile, Frank and his new wife Gail have just moved into a log cabin in Laurel Canyon and welcomed their first child. And little Miss Moon had a nanny, Christine Furka. She told Frank about a band she was a groupie of, perhaps the most famous group to ever come out of the Bizarre Records canon, Alice Cooper. I have to pause this story really quick to answer a question central to this video. What is a groupie? I know this video so far has been haha jokey jokey, but I'm gonna strip back the humor to make this hard clarification really quick. This girl was not a groupie. She was a child. I'm talking about old school rock and roll groupies who were out of school and old enough to be doing what they were doing. Groupies are women, sometimes men, but mostly women, who love the music so deeply that they're gonna be around it. They do the little things, you know, throw on a pot of coffee, sew buttons on shirts, take the boys out shopping for stage garb, or make the stage garb for them. They even help load gear at the end of the night. Groupies truly care about the music. They ask you how it's made and really listen when you answer. All of that is naturally the way to a musician's heart. This proximity, simply flying in the same circles of people as all of us humans do, is how a groupie might cross into muse territory. It's a lot easier to write a song about a girl you know, right? That's also where a physical relationship might come from. For a true blue groupie, any sex or romance is always second to the music. But it is fun and natural. There's no shame in it. Free love, man. For a groupie, sex is an expression for love of the art. In Miss Mercy's words, quote, "It wasn't that I wanted to go to bed with everybody. I wanted to know and be with the people I thought were making the best music and see it from behind the scenes. I just wanted to know how they did it and what was going on." This was the kind of groupie Miss Christine was for Alice Cooper, and Miss Pamela was for the Jimi Hendrix Experience, the Byrds, later the Flying Burrito Brothers, and Led Bloody Zeppelin. Miss Pamela is first exposed to avant-garde music through her friendships with Victor Hayden and Captain Beefheart, and she started hanging out with them at The Zappa residence. Here is where she meets Miss Christine. Tall and rail-thin with big bushy hair, she was quiet and strikingly beautiful. Miss Sparky got her name from the car she drove. It was so low to the ground, it'd drag on the asphalt and throw sparks. She was friends with Miss P. They met through Iron Butterfly and worked at a candy counter together, I think. There's a lot of lore, okay? This is by no means going to be a comprehensive history of the GTOs. The GTOs already had a stage act. These girls were in a dance troupe called the Laurel Canyon Ballet Company. That's how Miss Christine knew Miss Sandra. They'd play backup dancers for the groups they rolled with, and they put together their own costumes. How does one dress like a GTO? Kinda like this. You layer and layer and layer some more silks, velvets, antique lace, crochet, scarves, sashes. You simply cannot be without your feathers, though shoes and underwear are optional. What? This is California in the 60s. Nobody wore underwear. And once you think you're done layering, add one more. Top it off with some big hair and clown makeup, and congratulations, you're ready to hop on stage with Three Dog Night. Oh shoot, I almost forgot. These girls were on quite a few album covers. I mentioned Hot Rats before. There's this one, and the gatefold of Three Dog Nights, suitable for framing. This is how I discovered the GTOs. How did these chicks put together such outrageous fits? Christine was a very talented seamstress. She would make all her own clothes. As for the rest, they'd scour thrift stores for rags from the 1920s and 30s. Frank Zappa saw these girls look and stage act and loved it, but there was something missing. They needed edge. No one in LA looked like Miss Mercy, at least not in the 1960s. She dressed like a gothic silent film star, like Theda Bara, draping herself in velvets and doing her full face up with beyond dark eye makeup. Like Christine, she was striking and a little intimidating. Though Mercy was not a fan of Frank's work, he took one look at her and said she was in the band. The girls weren't a fan of her either at first. She straight up scared Miss Pamela. But once her tough exterior was cracked, Miss Mercy and Pamela were lifelong friends. The newly assembled GTOs were girly, campy, and utterly ridiculous. The fine line between scary and sweet. They had undeniable stage presence, and they turned heads wherever they went. So Frank thought, hey, if these girls love music so much, what's stopping them from becoming musicians themselves? Here's how Miss Pamela remembers the formation of the recording GTOs in the summer of 1968. Quote, "One sparkling afternoon, we were sipping tea with Gail, Zappa, in the spick and span kitchen cleaned by Miss Christine, discussing our amorous exploits, when Frank walked in and said he wanted to have a serious talk with us. He had given it a lot of thought and believed that the GTOs had real rock and roll potential, fabulous original ideas, and maybe even some hidden talent that might be tapped. Why didn't we write a dozen or so songs while he and the mothers were on the road? And when he came back, maybe we could record them for Frank's new label, Bizarre Records." And so, a bundle of Groupies were one of the first all-girl groups to release an album of all their own material, but not before Miss Mercy added Miss Cynderella to the group. In June of 1968, work begins on the GTO's debut LP. And remember that Sandy Hurwitz album I mentioned earlier? The idea was for the Mothers to be her backing band, but after Frank and Sandy's falling out, the Mothers were stripped from the album entirely. Seeing as none of the GTOs could play an instrument, the Mothers would be their backing band. Frank assigned the girls homework to get together and write lyrics about anything they wished to write about, whatever spoke to them. He really encouraged them to express themselves. They wrote about just being a girl, creepy gym teachers, guys who tried hitting on them on the Sunset Strip, creeps they hitchhiked from.
$10 to eat it. And we went, ah!
They wrote about people they knew. The Captain's Fat Teresa Shoes is about Captain Beefheart, and I'm in Love with the Ooh Ooh Man is about Nick St. Nicholas, bassist of Steppenwolf.
And his first name is the same as his last.
wrote something for King of the Sunset Strip,
Rodney
Love on an 11-year-old level was about some local kid the girls thought looked like Brian Jones. I don't know, but it's a super weird one. They got to work assembling a full stage act with singing, dancing, and skits. They were to make their formal debut on December 5th, 1968 at the Shrine Auditorium, on the bill with Alice Cooper, Wildman Fisher, and the Mothers of Invention. Captain Beefheart and his magic band were not on the bill because Captain Beefheart was inflicting psychological torture on his band? Anyway, the Jeff Beck group played the Shrine a week later. That's why Jeff is on the record. The girls were getting so difficult to corral that Frank assigned his secretary Pauline to be their manager. She's written a whole book about her time in the Zappaverse. The studio was a revolving door during production. Whoever was in town would drop by and say hello. That's how you got Rod Stewart on this thing. I know I've said this a few times before, but it truly took an act of God to pull Permanent Damage together. I cannot for the life of me find it, but there's this fantastic anecdote of Davy Jones somehow exacting some control in that studio and pulling off Ooh Ooh Man. Through Permanent Damage sessions, Frank connected the GTOs to another groupie out in Chicago, Cynthia Plaster Caster. You can hear Christine and Pamela's first phone call with her on this album. Cynthia was equal parts groupie and artist. Her thing was making molds out of the guys' things. Sorry, YouTube monetization. And making plaster casts of them, making art out of her groupie adventures, and a feminist statement about bodily autonomy. I happen to own 2 copies. It's up to you to look at the list on Wikipedia and work out which ones I've got for yourselves. It was Cynthia who got Miss P hip to Led Zeppelin. As for the album title, depending on who you ask, it was either a joke referencing brain damage from all the drugs she took, or a commentary on the LA scene. Quote, "That's all she saw around her. People permanently damaged by their environment." The track listing of Permanent Damage goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have the Eureka Springs Garbage Truck Lady. Strap in and get ready for some long-ass titles. Because following that is our first interlude. Miss Pamela and Miss Sparky discuss stuffed bras and some of their gym class experiences. Followed by Whose Gym Socks? Then Kansas and the BTOs. Next, the Captain's Fat Teresa Shoes. Followed by Wouldn't It Be Sad If There Were No Cones? Then Do Me In Once and I'll Be Sad, Do Me In Twice and I'll Know Better, or subtitle, Circular Circulation. Next, the Moke Monster review, and side 1 closes with TV Lives. Opening up side 2, we have Rodney, followed by I Have a Paintbrush in My Hand to Color a Triangle. Then, Miss Christine's first conversation with the Plaster Casters of Chicago. Next, the original GTOs, followed by The Ghost Chain to the Past, Present, and Future, or subtitle, Shock Treatment. Then, Love on an 11-year-old level. Next, Miss Pamela's first conversation with the Plaster Casters of Chicago, and the album closes with I'm in Love with the Ooh Ooh Man. Permanent Damage was released in December of 1969. Commercially, it was a flop. OG copies like mine are extremely hard to find. To critics of the time, it was an abject failure. Nevertheless, the GTOs were promoted by being the stars of Rolling Stone's Groupie issue. I have been trying to get my hands on one for years. Here's what Rolling Stone had to say about them. Quote, "The GTOs are a sociological creation of Frank Zappa's. He didn't create the GTOs, he merely made them a group. Each has a personality all her own, and together they are not to be believed. Chattering, laughing, telling stories, leaping about. The visceral reaction is full freak, but once you get into it, You don't even notice. So why does the album sound the way it does? Why is there so much chatter on Permanent Damage? It's because the group was pretty much broken up by the time the record came out. The girls were already on thin ice with Frank. About halfway through production, Mercy got arrested for possession of morphine. He was no nonsense about drugs. The hammer fell when Frank caught Miss Mercy and Miss Christine using the harder stuff. He disbanded the GTOs, but not before calling Sparky and Pamela back in to do some spoken word stuff. This is what Mercy had to say about Permanent Damage. Quote, "If I could go back, I would change some of the musicians on it." She really wanted Graham Parsons on the record. "And I would try harder. It meant something to me. It meant something to Pamela. I don't know what it meant to the rest of the girls, but it was fun at the same time. It was great to be able to say to the guys, yeah, we're doing an album too." The GTOs were fully done by 1970, only to partially reunite once in 1974. 50 years ago. So, where are they now? Miss Sandra left Laurel Canyon with her daughter Raven. She settled in San Pedro, California, met her husband, and built a family with him. She passed in 1991 at age 42 of cancer. Miss Cynderella wasn't active much in the public eye post-GTOs, but she went on to marry John Cale of the Velvet Underground. She passed in 1997. Miss Lucy, who had a bigger part in 200 Motels than she did in the recording version of the GTOs, passed in 1991 of complications of AIDS. Miss Christine went on to inspire such greats as Russell Mael of Sparks and Todd Rundgren. She's on the inner sleeve of Runt, an album I lost in a move and I'm really sad about. In 1972, Christine suffered an accidental overdose at the Modern Lovers House in Cohasset, Massachusetts. She was just 22 years old. Miss Mercy, who loved R&B, hung around the Stax Records crowd. She married Al Green's guitarist and Johnny Otis's son, Shuggy Otis. Together, they welcomed a third generation of musicians, Lucky Otis. Mercy struggled with substances, but she was a fixture of the LA underground scene for something like 50 years, known for her dark hair, darker makeup, and encyclopedic knowledge of cool and obscure shit. She lived a long and colorful life. She got clean in 98, worked at a Goodwill, generally was a badass, and wrote her own book, titled Permanent Damage, which was published posthumously. She passed about 4 years ago. As of me making this video, the only GTOs still with us are Miss Sparky and Miss Pamela. Miss Sparky did some more work in the Zappa universe, doing some vocals for Zoot Allures. Then she settled in New York. As for Miss Pamela, she did not go on to be an actress, but she became the most famous groupie in the world. She nannied for Moon Unit and Dweezil, starred in 200 Motels with Lucy, kept groupieing, and went on to marry Michael Debar. With him, she had her only child, Nick, and published her first and most successful book, I'm With the Band. She's issued several follow-ups, including sequel, Take Another Little Piece of My Heart. She's no longer with Michael, but they maintain a very good relationship. Miss P has been in many a documentary, including a VH1 special on Groupies, a guest appearance in Plaster Caster. She tried to start her own clothing line about 10 years back, had a brand called Groupie U. Her bread and butter these days is teaching writing classes. For those of us who haven't made it out to one of her seminars yet, she released Let It Bleed. So, 50 years after the last sighting of the GTOs, what do I think of their first and only album? Going in. She creaked down the lane. What the hell did I just listen to? Come on, Pilot Man, we don't have all day. I'm not so much reviewing an album this week as I am showcasing a historical artifact. According to Zappa biographer Billy James, quote, This was a fraction of society that most people would never know about or never heard about, and if it wasn't for him to document it, people never would. It's an auditory scrapbook that happens to have some songs on it. Due in part to Frank abandoning the project partway through production, this thing is mostly spoken word. Each interlude, while not particularly astute, is a window into what a girl hanging around the Laurel Canyon freak scene's life was like. I don't often get to say I have a personal connection to this week's group, but this week, I do. I was first connected to Miss Pamela through an ex-boyfriend of mine. He is a friend of hers and has done press photography for her. He was always so encouraging of my writing. First with my poetry, then on my blog, then when I wanted to make videos. He got me to believe in myself and gave me the literature that validated the way I feel about music. And the bands. And the boys in the bands. And my buddy Jesse is a dear friend of Miss Pamela's and was very close to Miss Mercy. This is the scarf that Jessie and Miss P gave me for my birthday. Thank you so much. The root of Permanent Damage is just girls shooting the shit. Chatting, laughing, singing the little songs they make up in their bedrooms, theatrically moaning and fawning over Ringo Starr, pretending to make out inside a piano. It's girls being girls. If you're my core audience, when do you ever get to hear girls being girls? If you've got any morbid curiosity to how us girls act when the boys aren't around, here you go. And totally themselves. If you listen closely to the gym class interlude, you hear Miss Sparky pacing around the booth as she talks to Pamela. Throughout the record, you pick up on Miss P's turns of phrase like, I can't believe it! I can't believe it!
From LA. I could believe it.
This is such an immersive experience. I feel like I'm hanging out with the GTOs, and I can see why their manager was run ragged. All that being said, my God, these girls cannot sing a note. The Eureka Springs Garbage Lady is quite literally one of the worst things I have ever heard. I listened to it all of once for the purpose of this review and then skipped it on every other listen. I honestly recommend you do the same. Miss Pamela agreed they couldn't sing. Quote, some of the singing, you can't even call it singing, but here's the thing. The singing is not the point. It's the concept. Quote, it was more performance art before that term even existed. We knew we were on the cutting edge of something. Being the Permanent Damage is a snapshot of this very specific place in time, the Sunset Strip in 1968. Some of this stuff has aged like milk. The entirety of Love on an 11-Year-Old Level is super fucking weird. Just Google the lyrics and you'll know what I'm talking about. And the Rodney interlude is great and goofy until...
I'll let you meet my little sister. She's only 12 years old.
Ah! But I get why Frank thought all of the above questionable moments worthy to include. It's shocking. These girls are earnest, but they're not being serious. They're trying to get a reaction out of you, whether that's a laugh or an eye roll or abject disgust. What isn't shocking is probably confusing. There are so many in-jokes written into the lyrics, cheapies, cones, moke monsters, that you might need a handy-dandy little dictionary to follow what they're saying. Let's get into what I dig about Permanent Damage, because challenging and abrasive as it can be, I do appreciate it very much. Rodney Bingenheimer. Aside from that line, the Rodney interlude is adorable. It's my favorite of the bunch. Speaking of outsiders dropping in, it is just hilarious that Frank got so many big names on this record. Rod Stewart is tearing it up on an impressively off-key song about shock therapy. Lowell George of Little Feat plays guitar on Circular Circulation. The guest speakers on Kansas and the BTOs are not credited, but I'm pretty sure it's Rodney Bingenheimer and Frank Zappa. Jeff Beck plays on the literal worst thing I've ever heard, and a f***ing monkey arranged a song about the bassist of Steppenwolf. Permanent Damage is a curio of so many fan bases, it is unbelievable. Being a music critic with special focus on groupie history, the guest I was most tickled by was Cynthia Plaster Caster. Cynthia and Miss P were lifelong friends from a phone call, an excerpt of which we got to hear on this record. As for the songs, most of them aren't bad. I know Pamela loves the Captain's Fat Teresa shoes. It is really cute. The jaunty piano and sideways keys make me feel like I'm tripping on mescaline in a bounce house at some kid's 11th birthday party. It's catchy in some fucked up way, and the proof is in me singing it to myself for days on end. The best numbers on here are Circular Circulation, TV Lives, Mercy's Song with the really long title, and Ooh Man. Written by Miss Sandra and sung by Miss Pamela, Circular Circulation is one of the very few remotely commercial cuts on this thing. With its lilting slide guitar and gentle sway, Circulation might even fit in as a hidden gem of Laurel Canyon's country phase. P's voice is sweet and light like cotton candy. She reminds me of a soprano Mo Tucker in her charmingly flat, doe-eyed affect. The other remotely commercial thing is Mercy's Song. All the high points on this record have one thing in common. They showcase the band. The mothers of invention are rocking out on Paintbrush. Energetic, jangly piano, strong, steady drums, and guitar that mimics Mercy's trilling vocals. Apparently this is about a threesome with Brian Jones. I'd never know, the lyrics are entirely incomprehensible, but she wears it well, confidently, strutting and humming through the song. I'm a television baby. My father's a knob and my mother's a tube. Christine's TV Lives, the hollow percussion and piano are spooky, spiraling, curious like Alice in Wonderland falling down the rabbit hole. It's an absurd and funny commentary on television culture and stuck in my head expeditiously. The other Pamela cut, I'm in Love with the Ooh Ooh Man, closes out the record. What do you mean? You're not in love with the Ooh Ooh Man? He wasn't born and raised in Schnit land. You mean to tell me his first name is not the same as his last? You guys, this is one of the cutest songs I've ever heard. You can hear hearts in Pamela's eyes as she sings about this guy. The harp flourishes are cartoonish in that Zappa way. He was never one to shy away from a sound effect. The little interjections about chicken suits are so weird. The rest of the girls backing Miss P chanting ooh 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 schnit 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 are just as delightfully kooky as they are adorable. I can see the choreography in my head. When you factor these highlights in with the rest of the record, let's be real here. If you are a hardcore Zappa fan, Permanent Damage will be no big deal. In order to enjoy Permanent Damage, you have to suspend your disbelief, but I can, because I get what they're doing here. I'm just as much a serious music critic as I am such a girl. Must I remind you, I interrupted a feature film-length docu-review on my favorite band with a tier list of my fave-raves hair. My monument opus, because let's be real here, we are never getting better than MC5 A Brief History, will forever be hyphenated by me being one step short of being a groupie. By showcasing Permanent Damage this week, I feel like I'm opening up a slice of my private life to you. And Permanent Damage reveals something very special about our main man, Frank Zappa. He had the foresight to immortalize abrasive, harsh, silly, weird things that might not have been valued in the moment, but they would have value in the future. The GTOs were a very special group of girls to Frank and the greater Laurel Canyon scene, and he was gonna do his best to capture capture how special they were. Of course, he couldn't capture the stage act, but the frou-frou, giggly, toothache sweet energy is here. It might be a little much for the more sober of you. It's a little much for me sometimes, but it's authentically girly. It's the product of 6 unique and special girls doing a unique and special thing with help from some ludicrously big names. Permanent Damage is zany, inimitable, totally original. In some f***ed up way, it makes my heart smile. Long live the GTOs, man. My personal favorites off this one are Circular Circulation, TV Lives, Paintbrush, and I'm in love with the Ooh Ooh Man. Who's my favorite GTO? Oh, how do I pick? I saw this photo of Miss Sparky on Pinterest and went, that's it, for now on, that's how I'm gonna dress. But Miss Mercy was 1 in a million, 1 in a billion. She was a survivor, one of the coolest ladies to ever live, I'm pretty sure. I have so many questions I wish I got to ask her. Miss Christine didn't get to live long enough to tell her story like Pamela or Miss Mercy did. All we have left of her are the album covers she was immortalized on, and her family on social media. Sometimes they'll post the clothes that she made. I remember seeing this video of her record collection and going, oh my god, we have like all of the same records. I didn't have only 6 of them. Our music tastes were so similar, but at the end of the day, come on, it's gotta be Miss Pamela. For crying out loud, I made her Foxy Lady dress. Miss P showed me that it was okay to love music and the bands as openly as I do. It's not silly or immature, it's very real and it's worthwhile. I'd love to take her writing class someday. She showed me I could be a writer. I can do all of these things that I want to do. She showed me that my love is my superpower. I guess that's the real thesis of this video. Love is a superpower. Frank's love of these girls made this album. And it wasn't the guys the girls spent their nights with that made them immortals in rock and roll history. It was these girls' joie de vivre or something. Their love of life and living, their love for each other that made them immortal in these grooves. And that's it! That is Permanent Damage by the GTOs. If you want to keep up with all of my favorite songs from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week, except for this one. The only GTOs song on Spotify is the Captain's Fat Teresa Shoes, but I do have the full album linked in the description should you choose to quench your morbid curiosity. What do you think of this album? What do you think of the GTOs? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, girls, please don't stop hoping. Never say your love is wasted. Love is only forgiving and something that cannot be taken. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11 and a new episode of my podcast every other Friday at noon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week with about 100% less feathers. Bye!